Hello everyone and welcome back for another edition of the Money Pros. I'm Oliver Tutt, certified financial planner practitioner, and I'm going to be your host for the next half hour as we talk about the issues related to your money, how to make it, how to keep it, and hopefully how to help it grow. We've got a great show in store for you today. We're going to be covering a lot of topics, and the first one is going to be this new book. It's by Michael Lewis, and it's called The Flash Boys, and it's caused quite a furor on Wall Street, along with the companion 60 Minutes piece that aired about 4 weeks ago. We're going to talk about the book and what it means for your investments. We've also got a regular guest on the Money Pros back with us today. She's Karen Del Ponte. She's our estate planning pro, and we're going to be talking about some of the top estate planning mistakes that people make, and we're also going to be talking about a high-profile celebrity death that actually that estate had several estate planning issues associated with it. We're going to talk about some of those. Hopefully we can learn something from that as you tackle your estate planning. Next topic, how do you measure the value of a college education? Well, website payscale.com has some thoughts on that. So we're going to look at how they measure the value of a college education, what they think the top values in a college education are nationwide, what schools, and then we're going to look at specifically Rhode Island, what they think the top values are here in Rhode Island. So we're going to take a look at that. And finally, we're going to reach into our Money Pros mailbag, and we got a question from a viewer on a very common topic, and that is the subject of IRA minimum distributions. So we're going to try to clear up a little confusion there. So we've got a lot to get to, but the first thing is this book by Michael Lewis called The Flash Boys. It came out about 4 weeks ago, and interestingly enough, there was a companion 60 Minutes piece that came out, and the following week on Wall Street was really pretty exciting. In fact, CNBC, they interviewed all the protagonists in this particular book, and it resulted in quite a fight. And CNBC is not known for its political drama, I will tell you, but this particular interview was pretty exciting. The whole subject of the book centers around whether high-frequency traders or program traders are actually gaming the system. Is the stock market rigged? And that's exactly what the thesis of Michael Lewis's book is. So what do you need to know as an individual investor, potential? You have money in the market, whether it be in mutual funds, individual stocks, you have a brokerage account, maybe you have a 401k, which is a big way that average everyday people access the stock market. Does what Michael Lewis is talking about with high-frequency program trading have an impact on your portfolio? Well, let's try to clear up some of the information that's in this book. One of the interesting things is, let's put up a picture. This is people's view of what the stock market looks like. It's a fairly typical picture. This is the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, various circles of people gathered around monitors, and these folks are market makers and they're trading various securities. So this is a place where buyers and sellers come together to exchange stocks. This is what people think the stock market looks like. This is not what the stock market looks like anymore. Let's put up another picture. Welcome to your new stock market for 2014. In fact, this has been the case really since about 2008. Computers, the stock market really takes place on server farms, most of them, interestingly enough, located in northern New Jersey, outside of Manhattan, where buyers and sellers are matched by computer software, and that's really where the stock market occurs. So the thesis of the Flash Boys, and I've only got a few seconds left, is really that high-frequency traders are gaming the system by getting in front of other investors and rigging the prices of stocks. But I'm here to tell you, while that may be true in a lot of ways, and they may be profiting, my honest feeling, and most commentators feel the same way, is that the impact of this activity is in the hundredths of a percent that it's reducing your return. So should you be concerned about it? I think absolutely no question. Should it be stopped? Yes, and I think that there's a lot of work being done to try to eliminate this, both by regulators as well as by the market itself trying to eliminate this because it's against a lot of people's interests. But the reality here is that it's not high-frequency traders that are average investors' enemies. You generally are your own worst enemy. If you get into the market at the top and get out of the market at a bottom, if you panic, those are usually the things that relate in losses. So while this is a fascinating story, don't get too hung up about it and don't let it prevent you from investing in the stock market. But I highly recommend the book. All right, up next we have Karen Del Ponte, our estate planning pro. We're going to talk about some of the top mistakes that people make in their estates. We're also going to talk about a high-profile celebrity death and the mistakes there. So all that and a lot more right here on the Money Pros. Welcome back to the Money Pros. With me now is Karen Del Ponte. She's our estate planning pro, and she's with us to talk about some of the top mistakes that people make when they're dealing with their estate planning. We tried to cull it down to a fairly short list of, I think, 5, but we probably could have made this list triple the size. There are a lot of mistakes that people make, but I think in an effort to try to bring it back to reality, so to speak, and not just talk about it straight out of a textbook, there was a recent high-profile celebrity death, somewhat salacious because of the means of death, and that was Philip Seymour Hoffman, died of a heroin overdose. Very tragic, excellent actor, but not at the end of his life by any stretch. Probably not thinking about his death, at least hopefully not on a regular basis. Who knows what demons he was battling. But there were some fairly significant mistakes with respect to his estate. And certainly we're talking about somebody who, one, had the means and the resources to get good estate planning advice, but also had the means and the resources to justify getting good estate planning advice. So as you looked at that situation, and there was a lot of information, he had about a $35 million estate, what are some of the observations you made about, where he went wrong with respect to the estate planning?
A couple of key mistakes. I mean, one is that he was with his significant other, but they were not married. And what most people realize is that when the first spouse dies, there's no estate tax either on the federal level or on the state level, regardless of the size of the estate. But that clearly is not true when you're leaving assets to someone who is not a spouse. So what some people don't appreciate is the fact that when they're leaving assets to a significant other, they have to deal with the estate tax consequences. And here, with a $35 million estate, it's truly significant, because the federal exemption today is $5,340,000. Anything over that, there's an estate tax of 40%, a flat 40% on the federal level, which in a state this size is huge. Where it would be more typical to see him leaving assets if he was married in a marital trust to benefit a spouse throughout lifetime, but the tax is deferred until she dies.
So I don't think either one of us would advocate getting married simply for the advantage of estate tax planning. But if you're in a relationship where effectively you're married and you're simply not getting married because, why bother, what's the point? There may be some very important financial points to take advantage of.
Definitely. Not only is the estate tax a consideration, but there could also be some benefits. There could be pension benefits. It could be because you get the higher of the 2 Social Security payments if you're a married couple. So there are financial benefits as well as a certain level of control in terms of control with respect to a funeral, etc. You have standing
life decisions, things like that, where you have standing.
You have standing as a spouse, but not as a non-spouse in that relationship.
Now, I think another one of the things, we've talked about this on the show many times, you've been with us before, is the importance of updating your estate plan. Now, his estate plan did address a child, but the catch was he had more than one.
Correct. The estate plan was written at a time when he had 1 child and then had additional children after that, and they're not mentioned in the will. So then the question is that intentional? Is it not intentional? Some states, but not all, have corrective action saying if you mention 1 child when you have 1 and afterborn children are picked up, but that's not necessarily the case. So people need to be careful to update their planning over time. I'm generally suggesting to people, absent a major life event like birth, death, divorce, you hit the lottery, it makes sense to look at your planning every 4 or 5 years probably, just to see what's changed and to pick up these occurrences.
I think it's a good point. We sort of lose track of how many things actually do change in our lives. It seems like it's very the same from day to day, year to year, but there are obviously some things that need to be addressed. All right, let's get to this list. So we have a slide. It's got several of the common estate planning mistakes that you see in your practice, and if we could put that up. The first one is, people think my will applies to everything I've got.
Correct.
Is that true?
Absolutely not.
All right, so if it doesn't apply to everything, I think we've got another slide. What are some of the things that it does not apply to?
One of the most important assets it does not apply to are your retirement plan accounts. So that could be an IRA, a Roth IRA, a 401k, a 403b. All of those assets are governed by beneficiary designations, and the beneficiary designations trump your will.
Okay.
So if you have filled out a form that you name your prior spouse as beneficiary and you die, that prior spouse or the American Cat Society or whomever you've named on that beneficiary form gets the money.
How often have you seen, and you've been doing this a long time, where a beneficiary designation was not updated and the money went to somebody that in all likelihood the deceased didn't intend any longer for them to get that money?
I have seen it several times involving some significant assets that you knew they did not want that person or organization to get the money. And in some cases, there's actually been litigation over it.
So it's not just a figment of our imagination.
Not at
This
all.
stuff actually happens. A couple of other categories of assets that pass by beneficiary as well, life insurance and annuities, right?
Exactly. The same thing. The forms trump. And so even though you have a will, you may have a trust, it's via that form you're designating where that asset goes. So if you want it to pass per your trust, for example, you need to complete the beneficiary form naming your trust as beneficiary. So those forms become very important. The other thing is sometimes as people are with one financial organization that subsequently changes, they maybe didn't keep their forms up to date through that transition. They should check periodically. We typically ask clients we want to see a copy in black and
sure
white
it's right.
to make sure that it's on file and make sure it's done right.
Because financial organizations, they get things right all the time, right? They're
Oh, definitely.
100% consistent. All right, let's take a look at the slide again, and the number 2 thing on there. People are under the impression that their will means no probate. I don't have to go through probate, I got a will. Philip Seymour Hoffman had a will. What's the probate like there?
Well, that's an interesting one. A will indicates who is to inherit your property when you die, but for a will to take effect, for it to have any legal effect, it has to be submitted to a probate court and approved by the probate court as your will. It has to be accepted by the court. So the will doesn't have effect until that takes place, and that's what's meant by probate of the will, that it's accepted by the court, and then the assets are passing per the terms of the will. The way people avoid probate is to use a trust. So if someone has a trust, if the asset is owned in their trust, that doesn't involve probate court. And the reason why people want to avoid probate court is to avoid paying fees to the court, paying fees to a lawyer who needs to prepare forms and appear in the court, to avoid the fact that it is of public record what you owned when you passed away and who inherits what. All of that is set forth in probate court. It's all public record.
So it's fair to say that probate is expensive, it's public, right? And it can be slow too. I mean, if survivors need money, it doesn't mean they're going to get it right away just because they're in the will. Is that right?
That's exactly right. If you have an account in your sole name without a beneficiary designation, it's not joint with someone else, and you die, the account is frozen because you're not alive to claim the account. So in order for your beneficiaries to get at that account, first probate has to be opened, an executor appointed, and then access can be had to that money. In some cases, if there's a potential will contest or controversy, there could be significant delay. All of that is avoided if people use trusts to administer their estate effectively.
All right, let's talk about the next one on the list, which is, and this is number 3, and I've had this one before when I try to encourage clients to get their estate planning done. Somebody says, well, my spouse is going to get everything. It's usually the husband saying this. They know they're going to die first, right? And they say, well, you know, my wife's going to get everything. What do I really need to go through all this estate planning for? Is there any purpose in it if you're married and, you know, they're going to get everything?
That is not necessarily true. What people need to keep in mind is joint accounts or a joint asset does pass to the joint owner, which may be the surviving spouse.
Often the house, maybe a bank account.
Exactly. But I've had circumstances where one party owns the home. Maybe it's a second marriage, the first spouse owned it. Maybe it's even a first marriage, but the first spouse owns the home in their name and they die. That home does not automatically belong to the surviving spouse. Under Rhode Island law, the surviving spouse would have a life estate in the property if it's Rhode Island real estate, meaning they'd have a right to live there the remainder of their life, but they don't own that property. And it would be owned either with the deceased children if they had children, or it would be the remainder interest would be owned by their heirs at law, who would start with parents, then go to siblings, and so on.
Wow, okay.
So other third parties could be involved in owning the real estate that you call home. And if your spouse owned the property in a trust when they died and you weren't named a beneficiary, then in a case like that, you don't even have a life estate interest in that Rhode Island real estate.
Wow, okay.
So it's very important for people, even if you're married, to be look at how are assets titled and how are they passing.
All right, we've got 2 minutes, we've got 2 more of these to go to. The next one is financial powers of attorney end at death. Now, I saw this one and I'm like, uh-oh, I might have this one wrong. Do powers of attorney end at death?
They do. They do. By most, in most states, including Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, powers of attorney end when you end.
Okay.
And the reason that's important is people say have been using a power of attorney to help an elderly relative pay bills, and they're shocked when the elderly relative passes away and they're saying, I used to be able to use that bank account to pay bills, now I can't access it. And the answer is that's exactly right.
All right.
The power of attorney ends, the will takes over at death.
And then finally, the last one on our list, trusts are only for the wealthy. This would probably be the number one I would run into. I don't need a trust, I don't have that kind of money. I don't know quite what that kind of money is, but most people don't think they have it.
Right. I mean, with a married couple, once you're over the Rhode Island exemption amount, for example, which is $921,655 today, catchy number, once you're over that amount, you're dealing with a Rhode Island estate tax at the second death.
And
So
it gets big quick.
it
and we
does.
talked about that
It does.
before.
In the top bracket of tax in Rhode Island, it's a 16% estate tax. So we're looking at it saying your trust can contain your estate tax planning to be frugal with respect to your estate taxes, yet benefit your spouse. It can provide trust provisions for minor children or other people who may need trusts. And it gives you that privacy, and you're not going through probate court that you would with a will.
All right, Karen, I'm going to hold you there, but those are excellent pointers. Hopefully our viewers won't make some of those mistakes. If you've got questions about your estate planning or anything to do with your personal finances, contact us here on The Money Pros. You can email me at moneypros@foxprovidence.com. You can look for us on Facebook. You can also tweet at us at The Money Pros. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We'll try to get the answers for you so you can make smart decisions about your money. All right, up next, how do you measure value in a college education? We're going to take a look at the top values nationally and here in Rhode Island. So stay tuned. There's more to come right here on The Money Pros. Welcome back to The Money Pros. So how do you measure value in a college education? We know it's one of the most expensive things you can potentially pay for, maybe short of a house, maybe not even short of a house, depending on where you go to school. Do you measure it based on what the lowest tuition is? Do you measure it based on who's giving you the best financial aid package? Maybe you measure it based on student lifestyle or who's the most competitive in basketball and football. Well, website PayScale, who is the largest private tracker of salaries in the United States, has their own methodology, and they looked at the return on investment from a degree at various college institutions. So what they did is they analyzed the salaries of graduates of various institutions versus the total average cost of attendance at those institutions. So nationally, they were able to calculate what is the best return on investment for the cost of that education. So let's take a look at the slide, and we're going to see nationally what they came up with. So number one was University of Virginia, an excellent institution with a return on investment on average of 17.8%, followed very closely by Georgia Tech at 17%, Harvard nearby at 15%, William & Mary 14.8%, University of Texas at 14.2%. So, you know, as expensive as a college education is, some significant return on investment there. Another interesting thing to note from that graph, 4 of those schools in the South, and if I'm counting correctly, 4 of them public institutions in the South, the only exception being Harvard private and here in the North. So I think we have some work to do. But let's talk about locally. What's the deal in Rhode Island? So they looked at all the Rhode Island schools. Number one was URI with a return on investment of 7.7%, so significantly below, for example, University of Virginia that we just looked at, but followed very closely by Brown, Rhode Island College, Bryant, and PC, all in a very tight range. So on average, return on investment, very similar. If you've got schools you want to take a look at the return on investment and use PayScale's website, you can check it out at payscale.com. Fascinating research to be able to do. If you've got questions about college planning, your own personal finances, or anything that has to do with your money, we want to hear from you. Let us know. Send me an email, moneypros@foxprovidence.com. You can also find us on Facebook where you can send us a message, or you can tweet at us, tweet at The Money Pros. We want to hear your questions. If we use one of your questions on the air, we're going to send you one of our very own Money Pros piggy banks. So let us know what you think. All right, up next in our final segment, we have a question from a viewer on required minimum distributions from IRA accounts. So We're going to answer that, and hopefully we can clear up that confusion. So stay with us. There's still more to come here on the Money Pros. All right, welcome back to the Money Pros. Last on our agenda for today, we have a viewer question, and I have to say this is one of the more common questions we get as financial advisors, and certainly a lot of tax people get this question as well, and it has to do with the required minimum distributions from IRAs. So we have a viewer that writes, my tax accountant told me I need to take a required minimum distribution from my IRA this year. What is this, and what if I don't need the money? Well, that's a great question, and if your accountant is telling you need to take a required minimum distribution, we know a couple of things. One, you have an IRA or some kind of qualified plan, and also we know that this year you turn 70 and a half. Kind of a weird birthday. I know most people don't celebrate it, but I'll tell you who does celebrate it. That's the federal government, because that's the day when they're going to start getting the taxes out of that IRA or retirement plan that you've been deferring taxes on for potentially 10, 20, 30, 40 or more years. So you haven't paid taxes on any of that growth. You've only paid taxes on the money you've taken out. And if you haven't taken any money out yet, you haven't paid a nickel in taxes. So the government is saying, all right, you got to pull that money out, and they don't care if you need it or not. So there's some tables that they use. There are many websites, Bankrate.com. Most IRA custodians, Fidelity and others, will have calculations. They will do the calculation for you. What if you don't need the money? Well, you can't put it back into an IRA, okay? So you can take it, you can put it into a brokerage account, you can put it into a bank account, you can give it away to your kids, but you can't put it back into an IRA. So that is the scoop with required minimum distributions. And by the way, if you don't take them, the penalty's 50% on the amount you were supposed to take. So it's something you want to make sure you do. All right, if you've got questions for us about your personal finances, let us know. Send us an email at themoneypros@foxprovidence.com. Find us on Facebook or tweet at us at themoneypros. That's it for today's show. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We'll look for you again next time right here on the Money Pros.